Back some time ago, I got this great opportunity to take a break from the normal stuff we do at home. It was probably a Saturday during the summer, I want to say. And my wife, Carolina, said, hey, go take a break. You've been working hard. You've been watching the baby or whatever it might have been. And so I was trying to think about how to piece together a couple of things. It was a Saturday morning. I was hungry. I'm a big sucker for egg sandwiches on bagels and that kind of thing. So what I did was I brought my thick wooden Go board that's not terribly light. It probably weighs maybe 10, 15 pounds. And I went to a nearby bagel store, got a bagel, and I went to a place called the Grounds for Sculpture, which is this really cool place nearby. It's actually a private setup where they have this wonderful grounds and sculpture that's mostly on the outside. And a lot of it has Asian undertones and things like this, but there's a spot in there where you can go and they have these nice tables set up outside along a beautiful pathway. There's beautiful trees all right around you. And I swear to goodness, it feels like a scene out of Hikaru no Go, where Fujiwara Nosai, the character that is from the ancient times of Go, it feels like that scenario where you're out in a beautiful setting and there's nature all around you and you're placing the stones on the Go board and there's a slight breeze and it's just, there's a body of water behind you. It was just a wonderful setup and I really enjoyed it. So what I did was I carried my Go board, I carried my stones to that spot. And then I set up my iPad so that I could find a game online and try to record it, but also play it down on the board. It was a little bit frustrating because the players with whom I got, a couple of the games were just duds. I started playing somebody, I think they said they were a South Korean player, and they started chatting me saying, oh, I'm so bad, I'm no good. We played maybe 7 or 8 moves and then they just timed out, which was frustrating because I don't get much time to go out to a beautiful place like this on a Saturday morning with such a great setup to do that. And so it was a little bit of a bummer to not feel like I had a really good game that I got in. It was really cool, though. There was a few people that were walking past. They looked like they were possibly of Asian descent, possibly Chinese. I lived in China for about a year, and I'm able to get some concepts in Chinese across. It was an older man, I think a father, and then a younger man, probably my age in his 30s. And they saw what I was doing over at the table and they pointed. And I think one of them said Weiqi. And it's funny how that is such a unnoticeable moment. I mean, that's not a terribly impactful moment. But where I live, in my particular place and time in the Northeast US, I mean, nobody knows about this game. At least any of the people with whom I speak to, friends, people at work, any of those things. So just to have somebody see me playing the game and have them point and say, oh, I know what that game is. There was something that was validating about that. It was just great to feel a tiny, tiny, tiny connection with somebody else. So with that, let's get started. This is All Things Go. Now we're going to talk with Nate Morse, a.k.a. Telegraph Go. He's a popular and very well-spoken content provider online. You'll see him on YouTube. You'll see him on Twitch doing streaming content. And I got to speak to him on a very special day where he had achieved a special milestone on the Fox server, which is one of the most popular places to play Go online. Take a listen. All right. So Nate Morse, thank you so much for hopping on with me.
Hello. Thank you for bringing me on.
What is the big news today?
I hit 9 Dan on Fox for the first time ever. First 9 Dan online account. Feels really good, man.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. And am I right? I think I saw on the stream that you may be the first one that streamed it, ranking up at 9 Dan while streaming.
Yes, I think that no one else has streamed their first rank up to 9 Dan before, which is a little strange. But yeah, I enjoyed it.
Give us a little bit of a sense. Like, what are some of the dynamics that come up when you're streaming a game and you're playing it at the same time?
Well, of course, you have to read chat and talk with chat. And that can get distracting. And I do occasionally blunder because I'm chatting about how big Alaska is. But Honestly, there's some positive effects too, which I think are underrated. When you stream, there's, I don't know, some social pressure that you have. Even if no one who's watching the stream really cares whether you try your best, I care when I stream. I want to try my best when I'm online. So if I get a little bit tilted, then it makes me want to lock in, rather than if I get a little bit tilted offline, off stream, then it can sometimes sort of phase you out of the game. It makes you not care so much because you're like, oh, this game's lost anyway, and I don't have to try so hard. But on stream, I always try my best. And I think that's part of why I got to 9Dan. I did get closer to 9Dan off-stream account before I did on the on-stream account. I don't think it's strictly negative. And I've even had a student who streamed himself doing Sumego once and then reported being much more diligent about doing Sumego ever since. Just because that one time that he streamed, he had that social pressure that he wanted to try his best for the Sumego.
Maybe we can use this as sort of a springboard into the interview and take it all the way back to high school. And
Sure.
You had a little interview back when you were doing the 2023 professional qualifying tournament back in August, and you were being interviewed and you said, oh yeah, I picked up the game in high school and I was actually a chess player at the time, but there weren't really any other good solid chess players to play against. And then there were these 2 4-dan players in high school. How did that sort of go?
Yeah, my school is quite small, but they had a couple of students originally from China who had become 4Dan before coming to the US, and they were both obviously way better than me. This is in my senior year of high school. I had senioritis, where you don't care so much about doing your classwork because you're already going to get in or not get into your colleges anyway. And so I started playing games, and I discovered Go, and I tried to learn it from the guides online, those little documents that we guide the beginners to, and I played some bots, and I kept being told by my 4Dan Chinese friends how easy all of the very basic stuff was, and it's really not a big deal. One of them had like an Instagram where they occasionally posted Go puzzles. I kept saying, no, these puzzles are like way impossible. There's no way, but they were not really that hard, to be honest. But
in retrospect, yeah,
in retrospect, the experience was just really fun to learn Go from them. I would occasionally play them in a 9-stone game correspondence and get crushed. It just made a little bit of a sense of community for me to pick up Go. And then ever since then, I've just been learning and learning and learning, and I haven't been able to put the game down for the rest of my life.
It's a good transition into your teaching side, because obviously that's how we met. If you had to sort of put it into words, how would you explain to a newcomer the parts that make this game, so fascinating, so enjoyable, I guess, special?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this, honestly, in the last little bit, more than I ever did before. In the last couple months, as I've been thinking about my YouTube channel and all of that, I've just been thinking about why is it that this Go game is so special, is so different than all the other games. And it really is. For me, at least, one of the things that I find very special about it is the way that perfection appears in Go is very different than perfection appears in most other, and pretty much every other discipline on the planet Earth. In most disciplines, even a beginner can sort of understand what the state is and how that state can improve towards someone's goal, right? So, if you show a chess player someone taking a bishop for free, then they're like, oh, good. And if you show someone who's someone running faster, they're like, oh, good. If you show someone who's playing soccer and you show them attacking all the time, they're like, okay, good. And you can sort of get a sense of what approaches perfection in most of these disciplines. But in Go, there's this sort of dichotomy between the things which are relatively easy to grasp. Even a beginner can understand what it means to take 2 eyes and to save your group, and the things which are just inhumanly impossible to grasp, which are most parts of the actual game. The fact that the game is so inherently chaotic that I can say that the vast part of the middle game is inhumanly impossible to truly master, that makes the game have a incredible appeal that is just not shared by almost any discipline, in the sense that when you dive deeper and deeper into it, you get to learn more and more and more in an almost endless way, and continue to level up and level up and level up yourself, but continue to dive into the mysteries of, well, my favorite quote about Go is from Fan Hui in the AlphaGo movie. He said, we don't learn to understand Go more. We learn to understand Go to understand understanding more, which is so true about Go. And it's just not true about almost any other discipline. I think it's what really separates Go is that because there's that almost infinite depth, you're going to pass so many revelations along your Go journey that you can't help but get a deeper glimpse of what a revelation really is. I think that's the part of Go, which is just completely magical and absolutely separates it from every other game and sport and discipline and art and anything else on this planet.
Even at my level where I'm by no means, even, approaching a Don level player, it's incredible to see just the layers that sort of unfold every time a new concept, comes into play. And it's so interesting. Once you get past a certain point, there's like a barrier to entry in the sort of the early stages. And then there's something that just hooks you. If you can get to that point, it feels like it's almost impossible to get away from.
In the best way, yeah.
Yeah, in the best possible way, right? So that's absolutely true. So perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about your teaching style when you first started, maybe how that's different or how it's been refined or tweaked to today.
I've been teaching for about 6 years at this point. I started teaching only 1 year or so after learning Go. And at that point, I wasn't teaching very, can I say effectively? And I wasn't teaching to a very high level or anything. But one of the things that I regret doing slightly is I taught some concepts which I was sure were mostly correct, but I wasn't sure were completely correct. And since then, I've realized some of them were wrong, and I regret teaching it. About, I don't know, a year or two into teaching, I started teaching only things I was 100% confident in, which I'm very happy that I do that now. It means that I feel every lesson that I've given has had at least a great opportunity to learn something. Additionally, beyond just like being correct when I teach, which I think is important, and not that easy, by the way. It's very easy to assume that you know something, but not actually know it. I've tried to make the lessons assist to the exploration of my own student, and I've gotten much better, I think, at matching to my student's mindset. So it can take some like watching a few games and some time thinking. But for every one of my students, I do my level best to really understand what's going on in their head before I try to teach them anything. I learned this from one of my greatest teachers, my teacher for musical instrument called the carillon, who would always exactly meet me where I was and bring me to just that one extra level more that I wanted to reach, and exactly show me what it took to get there and give me a plan to get there. And I would be brought there every lesson consistently, and I would keep leveling up very noticeably, very obviously in a very nice way. And that's what I try to bring now to my Go lessons every time that I teach. I want to meet my student exactly where they are. I want to show them exactly the next level that they really can reach and show them how to do it. I think I succeed more often now than I ever did before, but to be honest, it's still hard. I think this, it's a very high level of teaching that my carillon teacher was doing for me, and I strive to learn still as a teacher and as a Go player. There's still so much more to learn.
As a teacher of other things, not of Go, it's really hard, right? I mean, I think to be very good at doing something, Nate, you could say, well, hey, I'm a 9 Dan. I'm clearly very good at this game and what playing Go. But being very good at it and teaching it are very different things. And it's really interesting to hear about that journey, along the way. You had a really great post you actually put on Reddit about a year ago or so, but I actually have the post here, and I just thought it really nicely crystallized how you sort of think about working with a student and helping somebody learn the game. And you said this, and I'll just read it here for a moment. You said, as a Go teacher, I never give up. In my opinion, if I am committed to teaching one thing that can't stick, then I'm teaching the wrong way or the wrong thing. It happens even after so much experience, but it's a great sign to adjust myself. So I think that speaks to what you're saying, around this, like, hey, I need to adapt. I need to figure out what else I need to be doing. And then you go on here just a little bit more. You say, there are so many ways to improve your play and enjoyment of Go. I think almost all of the burden of success in teacher-student effectiveness lies with the teacher, because there are hundreds of different angles to approach the game. Picking the right one to share and framing it the right way is very difficult. And then you gave a really nice analogy. You said it's like planning a vacation. If you do it right, the vacation itself should be perfect and painless and completely separate from planning. So any thoughts to add on to that?
I've started to refine a few of those, like 100 ways, like hundreds of ways to teach. Definitely a few of them don't work for a very large amount of people, and a few of them work for more people. I think there's a good amount that the teacher can do to understand what the right way to help a student learn is that I can't do at the moment or back then, and I struggle with. But basically, as I've been starting a YouTube channel, I've been forced to change my teaching style from one-on-one and directly pressing with my student exactly where they are forward to a little bit of applicable to everybody and helping everybody learn at least a little something. And to be honest, that's significantly less effective. I can't possibly, like in a YouTube video, teach my audience as well as I can one-on-one. It's just nowhere close to as effective. But there's a lot of things that I can do that a lot of people can learn a lot from. And it's finding those things that like resonate more with a wide audience that I'm interested in doing now. And in particular, the audience that is not already 100% involved in Go. I want to get more and more people involved in Go. Of course, there's many ways to do that, but there's a few good ways to do that. And I'm trying to find those right now. That's the current goal.
That's something else we're going to talk about here shortly, about your YouTube channel and how that compares to this sort of one-on-one teaching, but then how it compares to streaming, right? And all the trade-offs of how you're interacting with an audience or a person, I think is really key. So I appreciate that. What's the most rewarding part? What's the most challenging part? And maybe you already spoke to the challenging and we could just focus on the rewarding part.
The most rewarding part by far is when the student understands deeply. I don't mean like they understand in a way that they could repeat what I said, that they could apply it to the same position, but in a way that they themselves are now thinking in the same way and thinking in the same way in their real life as well. I've had a couple students take my lessons and take something out of my lesson and apply it to their own livelihood in a way that I didn't expect and in a way that they really were enhanced by. And that is just so gratifying as a teacher. It makes me feel like I've really done something. Of course, it helps when they really deeply learn it in Go as well. then when they deeply learn it in Go, then I can be like, oh my goodness, my student has ranked up and they're clearly a stronger player. The wonderful part of Go is this deep learning, is this real true understanding. And it's so nice to impart that. In terms of challenges, it's definitely imparting that. It's hard.
It brings up this interesting question that I think a lot of us ask on the journey as we're going through Go and we're playing games and we're learning. If you hit a point where you felt like you were stagnating, where you said, oh gosh, it's been quite some time and I'm not improving by these outside measures, do you think you would lose interest in the game?
No, I will never give up Go. I love this game. The way that the game works, when you play, you aren't forced to learn. You can play and you can just go by all your habits and do the same thing that you always did and play a full game at the same level that you always did. But you are forced to explore. Even if you play at the same level in the same way that you always did, the fact that the other guy is also exploring, is playing, even if they're not improving either, even if they're playing the same way they always did and blah, 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 Go itself is so inherently chaotic that you're bound to reach a position where no one has any idea what's going on. And you don't have to learn how to play that one better to explore it. Just like you don't have to learn how to hike better to go hiking. And it's just that natural experience of exploration through the position that is so enthralling for me. I wouldn't mind to never improve as long as I can always experience that exploration for the rest of my life. It's okay. I just like exploring. I just like seeing what's going on.
This is something that I'm sure you deal with regularly as a teacher, but also as an online personality, where you're constantly hearing about sort of the psychological aspects where people are saying, oh, I'm stagnating or I'm plateauing or whatever that might be. And we're all coming at this from different walks of life, different phases of life. So it's really helpful to get that context, at least from how you feel. That concludes the first half of my interview with Telegraph Go. Stick around for the next episode where we'll continue with the second half of the conversation. Next up, we have Gazza White, co-host of the Pro Go Weiqi Podcast on YouTube, back with us to discuss a little bit about how the professional Go system is set up and also help us understand how the best player is determined, along with how the World Championship system works. What do you see as unique aspects to the professional Go system compared to chess or other similar games?
Yeah, chess is a really good game to compare it to because, like Go, chess is, a board game 1v1. With chess, you have like an international governing body, FIDE, and most of the top level play is sort of under the umbrella of that governing body. FIDE also have a chess world championship, which is, I think, run every few years. They actually have a few versions of the world championship, but there's like one definitive one. And they also give out titles like Grandmaster, International Master, things like that, which have, relevance sort of among the best players in the world. And they also have a rating system, like a numerical way to compare players. And Go doesn't really have that at the professional level. There's no one world organizing body for the professional scene. In terms of titles, they have the Dan ranks, like amateurs do. It goes from 1 Dan up to 9 Dan, but they're very rarely used in any sort of manner, like being a 1 Dan or being an 8 Dan. Like being an 8 Dan doesn't really give you access to different events or anything like that. It used to in the past, but it's become less and less relevant now. And there isn't an official universal rating system in Go. There is an unofficial rating system called Go Ratings, which seems to be quite popular among Western fans. But I do know that Korea have their own domestic rating system. China have their own domestic rating system. I think Europe does as well. But as far as I'm aware, there isn't an official international one. Perhaps the most important distinction is in chess, for instance, there isn't really a clear distinction between professional and amateur. You have grandmasters and you have international masters, but getting that certification just is sort of a sign of accomplishment. It's not a sign of whether you're, like a full-time player or not. For instance, I believe there are some international masters who make their entire living from chess, whether it be playing or producing content on social media. On the other hand, I know of some grandmasters who are part-time players and have like full-time jobs outside.
Interesting.
When it comes to Go, when you get that professional certification, you're basically dedicating yourself to the game. That doesn't mean you can't do part-time work elsewhere, but there's a very clear distinction between professional and amateur in the Go world. And typically the Korean Baduk Association, the Chinese Weiqi Association, the tournaments that they run typically will be exclusively for professionals.
Okay.
There'll be some where there may be like 1 or 2 spots for amateurs, but typically professionals will only play games against other professionals. Very rarely do they play games against amateurs, well, not official games at least.
In Go, how is someone crowned or considered the best player? Is there one person that is proclaimed the world champion each year? Like, how does that work?
As I said before, chess does have a world championship. Go does not really have a single world championship. There's no one tournament that is considered to be the premier tournament and superior to all other tournaments in declaring the best player in Go, like the Chess World Championship. Instead, Go does have what are considered to be world majors. So these are international tournaments that are typically somewhere between 24 to 64 players from all of the different regions. And whoever wins that is crowned the champion. But there are several world majors every year. So in terms of determining who is the best player in the world, depending on the skill level, there may not be a consensus. If different players are winning titles and there doesn't seem to be one player who's beating everyone else, that there'll just be a difference of opinion. But typically, to be considered the world's best player, you have to consistently be doing well at these international events. And in the past, there were certainly players that were doing that. For instance, 20 years ago, there was, or 25 years ago, there was Lee Chang-ho, a very well-known Korean player who I would consider to be the best player since World Majors only started in the late 80s. I would consider Lee Chang-ho be the best player since the beginning of World Majors.
Okay.
And then after him, there was a gentleman by the name Lee Sedol, who was then challenged by Gu Lee. So often both of them would be considered to be, the top of the Go scene. And then in the mid 2010s, you could say that it was there wasn't really a clear best player in the world until Ke arrived in maybe 2015, the Chinese player, and he was the best player in the world for about 5 years. And there is a consensus best player in the world at the moment, a Korean gentleman by the name of Shin Jin-so. And it's unanimously considered that he's the best player in the world, and it's simply through his performances in international competition and in domestic competition. He wins an excessive number of games. Yeah, there isn't an official title, though, of world's best player.
I see. Now we're going to talk about a really key concept in Go, which is playing the corners first, then the sides, then the centers. We're going to talk with Gabe, who runs Struggle Bus, which is a YouTube channel, and then with my Go instructor, Nathan Harwitt. Gabe, you have your Struggle Bus channel on YouTube, which has been incredibly helpful for me personally, but tell us a little bit about this game and how it went.
So for people who don't already know about the channel, basically I formed this because through my teachings, I've come up with basic rules for playing good solid Go. And, rule number 1 is we care about corners, then sides, then centers. And, I've gone over examples in various videos that show why that is. But basically, it comes down to when you're on the corner, you already have 2 walls built for you. When you're on the side, you've only have one in the center. You've got to build all 4 sides. And so it's just, typically inefficient. And so playing this game, recording it for a video. And it was interesting because, the intent of the series that video is in is to really highlight those rules, right? So I do my best just to keep things simple and follow the rules. And I point out where my opponent does a good job of following them and then, less good job. And in this game, my opponent was really focusing all their stones on the center of the board, which obviously, doesn't really work out too well. And what was interesting about this one is I had ample opportunities to very easily just jump in and completely tear apart the center. But I realized, after like move 40 or so, that I was like, wait a second. I'm like, I can actually use this as a perfect example of just showing, hey, I actually don't have to do anything to that center other than just push it in from the outside and take all of the sides. And so I actually turned it into an experiment at that point in time. I was like, hey, yeah, let's just see if I can truly just follow that one rule of only caring about the corners and the sides and letting him get the entirety of the center. Let him get as much of that center as he wants to grab. And we'll see where it goes from there. And so basically, I then finished out the game, just keeping it very simple. And I never once invaded. I let him take the entire center. And even through all that, I did end up winning the game. And I was glad that I was able to have the opportunity to just do this experiment, right? And go, I'm truly just going to follow this one rule.
The reason you go for corners is because they're more efficient. You have the edges to help you surround the point, so it's actually harder to break in. And it visually looks like the corners and sides are not as big as the center, but if we use a simple example, it's actually pretty clear that they are actually, in fact, a lot bigger than the center. On the 19 by 19 board, if you draw a line of stones on the 4th line all the way around the board, you'll end up getting 4 times 57, but you're double counting the corners. So you take off about 16. So you have close to 200 points. And then if you give the opponent the remainder of the points, they would have a 9 by 9. So they'd only have 81. So you'd win by more than 100 points if you got 4th line territory. And even on the 3rd line, it's pretty close. It comes out to about even on the 3rd line. And that's actually why people play on the 3rd and 4th line and towards the corners, is because that's roughly what you would need to actually win, even if your opponent got the rest of the board. It just takes more moves in the center to get the points. So in terms of overall efficiency, you're going to be much lower. In the corners, you probably get 3 to 4 points per stone, roughly. Part of the problem with the center is it's also really easy to invade, and so you're just going to be spending a lot more stones to get the same amount of points.
Now we're going to talk about what I call the Dao of Go, which is why Go is so incredibly interesting, amazing, gratifying, but also difficult and frustrating all at the same time. The first is that it's relatively easy to learn. The rules are very simple and basic, and yet those very rules is what makes the game almost impossible or very difficult to master. And this was a big drawing point to the game when I first got into it. I was doing basic things. I was trying to understand the basic concepts of capturing groups and playing against computers, and I was really struggling. I wasn't doing well at all. And I was so struck by the fact that I wasn't getting it quickly. Normally, I would say that that's something that would turn me off to something, and I'd say, this is stupid. I don't want to play anymore. But for Go, it was actually quite the opposite. And I would say that I was in a unique place because I was learning this during the pandemic. I had time on my hands where I could really come back to the game and really rack my brain to try to understand why exactly it was that I wasn't getting it. And so that was very much a pull. That was something that got me hooked on the game. And this is not how a lot of games are set up. Actually, many games are set up to be easy and draw you in so that you're hooked more quickly. And I think Go is different in that respect. And that also might limit it in terms of becoming more popular. It's interesting to me too how when you put one stone down on the board on one intersection, that one move can completely shift what's going on the board. Almost like electromagnetic fields. It's like you put one piece down and now that makes certain groups near that stone much stronger, much weaker. It can remove a liberty and put a group at risk of being captured. There's so much nuance and subtlety to the game, which is what makes it so fascinating. And I'm very early in my journey with Go, but I'm finding as we do in certain endeavors that the more that I learn, the more that I realize that I don't know anything. And when I talk with my Go tutor, I'm explained over and over again that you learn these rules of thumb or principles for how to play. But as you progress and get better, you continue to find that those rules of thumb no longer apply, or there are a lot of exceptions to them, which is incredibly frustrating, but also it's what makes it really interesting. If this game were quick and easy and could be solved in a relatively short period of time, I think a lot of us would never have even gotten into the game or never stayed with the game. Number 2, I love and hate the esoteric nature of Go, particularly where I am in the West. I love how unique the game is. To me, it feels special. I think I've always gravitated towards activities that are a little bit more unique. They're not super mainstream. And yet at the same time, I really hate the fact that it's not more popular. I wish there were more people with whom I could speak about it, with whom I could just talk about it. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. Like, there's nobody in my physical life that knows about it beyond the people with whom I've actually introduced it. And so that's unfortunate. Finding resources in English is far from straightforward, easy. I think it's gotten a lot better in the last few years, and I'm sure over even longer periods of time, but I can only speak to since I've been involved in the game. And a lot of us, I'm sure, are very familiar with the challenge in using the word Go when searching online for anything about the game, because Go is such a vague term in English. It's incredibly flawed. And I know there's been a lot of talk and discussion on forums and throughout the community about naming it, perhaps its Chinese name, Weiqi, or its Korean name, Baduk, or something else in the West so that it can be a little bit easier to search and to find. Number 3, despite my not looking for a game or a hobby that's innately social, it's actually really interesting how I actually have to connect with other people if I want to improve at Go. And it is funny how I do enjoy the social aspects as well, but I initially got into the game because of the trickiness and the intrigue of the puzzle of it all and how all of it fit together and the different layers of it. And at the same time, I would get nowhere unless I had a teacher or somebody of a higher ability, a higher skill level to help me understand the levels of the game and the different things that are happening. My experience or my circumstances are such that my hobby is on a relatively limited time basis. So I have full-time job, I have a wife, I have a son, and those are always going to take up most of my time. And because I don't have the time to just crank out a lot of different games, do a ton of puzzles, there's an improved efficiency by my learning from those that are much stronger than me, learning from Go tutors and teachers. And so that's been really great. And there's also a benefit of having a diversity of guidance from many different players, from having different strengths and different styles of play, because this game is not straightforward. It's not as simple as this move is always right. Yes, you can use AI to determine if a move is a good move or not. But as I think a lot of us know, so much of that is in understanding why, right? Why a move is good or not. And so I've found that to be a very interesting aspect of Go, that if you just played it by yourself in a bubble, sure, you could have AI and you could brute force it and play a million games. And if you had a lot of time on your hands, I would imagine you could get quite good at the game. That being said, there just seems to be whole nother aspect to the game when you are able to learn from others. And I do think that you learn much more efficiently. Per unit of time that you play, having a very good teacher that is much better than you in Go really goes a long way. Number 4, Go needs time and repetition, as I just spoke to. My lack of time to play the game is frustrating because I can tell when I'm not getting as much momentum and learning concepts or playing enough games, because I play very few games over a given period of time. I also am savoring it because I know that I'm at my level. I have a lot of runway to learn and to improve in areas or at points where you can make a lot more improvements. I've heard over and over again that at certain levels, it's very, very difficult to make improvements when you are at, whether it's low to mid Dawn level or whatever it might be. If I ever even get to Dawn level, quite honestly, I don't care about getting there necessarily. I really just want to keep improving. That's the most fun. You could even make an argument that if you stop improving at a certain point, maybe that can still be fun because there's so much complexity and so much nuance that can happen in a game, even if you stay at a certain level. But pattern recognition can help you pick up the game fairly well. And this kind of gets into the concept of intuition versus the ability to read moves. I think a lot of that intuition comes from just brute force repetition, pattern recognition of seeing what works and what doesn't, which is what I feel I lack tremendously. Whereas when I talk to my Go instructor, he just intuitively knows when there are certain bad shapes or good shapes because he's just seen it so many times. And so there's certainly some pattern recognition that comes into this particular point. Number 5, Go seems to be symbolic of both peaceful and warlike concepts. So I've seen Go be referenced historically as being used by samurai to develop a sense of strategy, in businesses to develop a sense of strategy and diplomacy. I've also heard it be referred to and connected to Buddhist philosophy and concepts around non-action or the ego or these sorts of things, or a sense of balance, right? Not being too greedy. So I really find that interesting that it can be both of those things. It's very much, I think, in the eye of the beholder. I choose to connect it more to the Buddhist philosophies because that's just more, that speaks to me more personally. So my question for you is, what is it about Go that you find unique? What aspects do you appreciate most about the game? Please feel free to share your thoughts and your comments. Thanks for listening and catch you next time.